So, unsurprisingly, I'm super interested in poison, so let's talk about it a bit today. I want to go over the very basic mechanics and what changed, and then dive a little bit deeper into a little bit of a spreadsheet with some deeper explanations of what I currently believe is how poison works. Obviously, it's highly speculative in many areas, making lots of assumptions, and I might just be wrong. But I'm sure somebody in the comments will correct me if that is the case, and then yeah, maybe check that out for some more information and where I made some errors. At a baseline, in PoE 1, if you look back a little bit, poison, quite fitting to the fantasy, actually worked like applying tons of single poison stacks, basically. So basically you could stack poison infinitely. So the basic idea was you take a decent hit, you always needed a hit, that had a ideally 100% chance to poison if it hits, right? And you have a 100% chance to poison. You just apply one stack, and then you wanted ideally very high frequency of hitting, like high attack speed or whatever was the actual hit, to stack as many of these poisons as possible. And then you would invest quite a bit into scaling the poison damage itself, and then on top of that lowering some kind of resistance or damage mitigation in general against this type of damage. So you typically had like, basically your hit damage didn't really do anything, and all your damage came from poison. It was very typical to have builds that had all the damage was from the actual poison, and the hit didn't really matter. Which was quite fitting, fantasy-wise, I feel like, of this, like having tiny poison darts or poking somebody with with like a needle and inflicting poisons. And the more you do that, the more poison is in their bodies, and then, they die. It was kind of cool fantasy-wise with this infinite stacking. That's all gone. Now it's very different, actually. And I've pulled up this article here. It's surely not finished and has weird stuff in it or not, who knows, but it's a kind of a nice baseline, and I also wanted to make sure to promote a little bit this new wiki here, which is the one we should all use. So let's go over this as a baseline, how this will or might actually work in PoE 2. So we still have a hit. So we require to actually hit the enemy, and the combined damage of physical and chaos damage that this hit has, X% of that will apply as poison. Before it was 30%. I'm just assuming it's the same. Maybe it's less. I don't know if that even was known yet. Maybe it's 25. Let's just roll with 30 for now. It doesn't really matter. It's some percentage of that damage. Interestingly enough, this is before mitigation or without any mitigation, and has nothing to do with damage taken modifiers. So if the target has a lot of chaos resistance, for example, you're hitting with chaos, let's forget physical for a while here, and it has like a high chaos damage mitigation, then that doesn't actually matter for the calculation of your poison damage initially. The same thing with if you apply a lot of damage taken stuff, like increased chaos damage taken to that monster, or you lower its chaos resistance, doesn't actually matter for the base poison array. All that matters is this final hit you're dealing, and X% of that, let's say 30% of that, defines your basic poison damage, which is chaos damage, which you're assuming here, and has a base duration of 2 seconds. So that means if you have like a hit of, let's say 100, 30% of that is like 30, right? And then you will deal 30 poison damage over time per second. So if the duration actually still is, you can modify that 2 seconds. You would just deal, like you poke it once, it deals 100 damage, and 30 of that per second, so you deal like 160 damage, essentially, to the monster. If you would just poke it once and run away, and there's like nothing else happened, there's no mitigation at all in that point. So this percentage here, you can actually change. Like that's pretty much the only way to directly scale your poison stuff, and that's a multiplier to this initial percentage here. So it's a new stat thing. I think it didn't exist before. It's called poison effect or magnitude. I've seen it before as well. It's also listed here. But let's say, or whatever, maybe this is a generic ailment effect. let's say you have 100% of that, which is a lot, but you can probably get on like tree and stuff. So if you have 100% increased poison effect, then if this is 30, you would deal 60% damage of this, or your poison would be 60% of the initial hit. It's not 130, right? It's not like additive of this. It's multiplicative. So yeah, if you get 200%, it's even more than it's 90, and so on and so forth. So that's just scaling the base poison damage per second, basically, that you're starting with that. You cannot directly scale it. More on that a bit later in the spreadsheet. Like if you have like increased chaos damage or something like that, like all of that will not apply to your initial poison damage. That just doesn't exist that way, which is interesting. Very interesting, and very different to PoE 1, basically. So yeah, so you can just make the hit bigger, or you do the magnitude bigger. That's your base poison damage you do. Regarding stacking, already said, you can no longer infinitely stack it. You start off with 1. It's like complete opposite. You just have 1 poison, and you can scale that. Very baseline, just like on the revealed tree here. If you look here, you get 1 here. That's already known, obviously, with some drawback. You know, you can poison enemies an additional time as the birding. And you have another baseline one, which is here. You can also poison an enemy an additional time. So you already have 3, like baseline +1 +2. And there's like a support gem that gives also +1 with another drawback on it. So you baseline already have like +4, not baseline, but especially if you like a Pathfinder or whatever, then you can get these. So let's say you have 4 with that, and if you actually are a Pathfinder, which seems to be the default here for that, or like kind of the obvious choice to just give it a try, you have this overwhelming toxicity, which gives double the number of poisons you can inflict on enemies. So if you have like you don't use a support gem, you get 3 times 2 is 6, and if you use the support gem, you already go up to 8 essentially. Just what we have seen and can confirm for now. So I'm going to assume that 10 is not unrealistic with 1 more source of +1 somewhere. So yeah, if you go with that, so you can do that there. So this one, the more you invest into it, the better. Obviously, this node gets there. But baseline is 1, and getting like infinite is no longer happening. One other interesting thing that is mentioned here is. First of all, it has independent duration, each of the stacks, so there's no refreshing just because you poison again or something. They just like exist. But this kind of suggests, and also makes sense in PoE terms in general, that you can still poison enemies even though they're already at their maximum stacks. Just these instances will not deal any damage. It's only the highest one at a time. Let's say you have a limit of 1. There can be 100 poisons, basically, technically. I don't know. On the enemy, but just the highest one would deal damage. If that one runs out and there's still another instance left, it looks for the highest one, and that one will continue to deal damage, but they all run out at the same time. So why this is interesting is because if you poke an enemy or hit it, there's effects that, or there's stuff that takes effect because you did poison something. So I'm gonna assume that it means even though you're already at full stacks, you can still benefit of the effects of I just recently, for example, poisoned X amount of enemies and stuff like that. Just like, okay, this hit did poison, so something else happens will still apply even though the enemy is already at its maximum stat limit of, or stack limit of actually receiving damage from that. One bit more interesting that very much the only one I've actually seen so far is like this one, for example. It's called Escalating Toxins. 10% increased poison duration for each poison you have inflicted recently, up to a maximum of 100%. So you can, if you poison 10 times per 4 seconds, basically, and you still have a poison stack limit of 1, you can still get this to 100%, I believe, because every hit in between that does actually poison the enemy will still count towards that. So that's kind of interesting, I feel like. And good to know, or just like an assumption that this will be the case, that you can still poison people for these effects. Oh yeah, the chance on chance to poison here. How does that actually work? Before, it was just a chance to poison, right? So you had like 60%, so you hit. Did it actually hit? If yes, then okay, cool. Then you just roll a dice, and if you hit the 60%, then that's fine, it poisoned. If you had 100%, it was guaranteed to poison all the time. And that is no longer the case. I've heard a little conflicting information that it might actually still be the case, but also here in this article and a lot of other sources, it also said, no, this is like all the other elements. It depends on the damage dealt. So that means there is still a chance to poison, and we will go into this a little bit later in more detail. But you have like a baseline chance, which you can also increase to poison. So there can also be 100%. I guess there's still no benefit going over 100, but maybe there is actually in math-wise. But anyway, it first checks if you have a chance to poison, and if that checks out and you roll well on that, potentially, it's still after that you have to reach the so-called element threshold of that particular monster. So that one basically depends on how big was your hit and how much life does that monster have, right? So if you have a very, very big monster and you hit it with a very small hit, then you have a very low chance of actually poisoning it with that. So your hit damage, which you want to scale anyway to do any meaningful poison damage now, comes into effect there. So you need a big enough hit to actually poison that enemy. That being said, that has never been the case, but also in PoE 2, critical strikes do not guarantee element application. That was the case in PoE 1 for like the elemental elements, I believe, but never has been for poison anyway. But it's not now either. However, crits are useful now because a crit increases your initial hit, which is also before mitigation. There's no extra damage taken. It's just before your hit is bigger, so it makes it more likely that you overcome that monster's ailment threshold in this case. So that's kind of useful, maybe, in some cases. So also like, because your hit is bigger, it's already big, and crits increase that hit by also like a multiplier. It also is more relevant for the actual damage. So like crit poison is more of a thing now, I guess, or more possibility. But that's for how you actually get poison on enemies. The next thing is with damage over time, or basically interactions with energy shield. Before that, chaos damage always like bypassed energy shield, which is no longer the case. It's interesting now. Bit of a side note, because you're probably going to deal some chaos damage, like the hit portion of it, that or just any chaos damage basically. It doesn't really deal double damage. It does something even more interesting. So the basic thing is chaos damage removes twice as much energy shield, which is not double damage. It is basically after all the damage multipliers are already in, let's say the resulting damage that needs to be removed from the enemy, basically. Technically, if it has no energy shield, it's like, let's say 100 life would be removed. Since it has energy shield, it goes to energy shield first, but that number at the very end gets doubled, like the removal number. It's like a very, very powerful multiplier, right? If you would deal 100 damage to that energy shield, now it will do a 200. So that's really interesting for chaos damage. It will remove energy shield really, really quickly, but it doesn't like bypass it anymore. Different for the elements. Which I say elements in plural because it's the same for poison and bleed. Both of them, like the damage coming from that, completely ignore energy shield. Like that one goes through, but hit-based chaos damage basically removes double from the energy shield. I found it kind of interesting because it's likely that you're dealing chaos damage if you're poison build anyway, and you're not fist-based, but who knows what happens there. But that's like how it interacts with the energy shield for the poison part, which is no longer that big part of your damage compared to before. Then, it bypasses it, and the other one, the hit part, just removes more than double. Like, let's go into a little bit more detail. It's a flashbang warning. I'm going to open a spreadsheet which is white. So like flashbang in 3, 2, 1, now. That's kind of horrible. I'm sorry. Anyway, that's a spreadsheet I made. Here again, there might be stuff in there that is wrong. People will correct me. Sorry about that if that actually happens. I wanted to go a little bit more into detail and show stuff with some math and some numbers. More on the purpose of giving people a better understanding. And as I said, this is my current understanding of how stuff works. For the chance to poison stuff, the general one, how I believe this will work is you have a chance to poison an inherit one. Let's assume it's a 100%. And this number here would be the ailment threshold, which I also believe is probably a multiplier to your chance to poison. That's how I believe this will probably work, right? So if you have a 100% chance to poison and the damage of your hit is, according to the game, basically ideally within range, like in comparison to the monster's life, like everything is absolutely perfect, there will just be 1. So 100% times 1 is just a 100% chance to actually poison, to apply that. So let's assume you only have like 60% chance to poison, but the magnitude kind of thing, or like the ailment threshold thing is still at 1, then you would only have an effective chance to poison. So why I believe this will be a multiplier, this ailment threshold thing is, let's assume you have a very small monster where you deal a relatively large hit to it, but they don't want this monster to be poisoned so easily because, I don't know, lore or whatever reason. They could just lower this monster's ailment, or increase this monster's ailment threshold, basically, and all of a sudden, with your 60% chance to poison and a monster that has like a high threshold, even though it might be a very small monster, you end up with a lower chance to actually poison it. The same thing with like a boss. If you have a boss that has gigantic amounts of HP and you deal a decent hit for like your power level to it, you would probably end up like having almost no chance to poison it, like ever, just because the boss has so much health. So I can totally imagine that they lower the ailment threshold of this thing, which sounds counterintuitive, I feel like, but that's my assumption of that. So they can actually lower that. So like you have a chance to poison, but it's like really big. Something in there. There will be some numbers there. But that's what I believe. That also means if you have let's say you have a 120% chance to poison, and then the threshold thing, like this monster is harder to poison, but you overcap in poison chance, it might be that it's actually helpful, right? If you have a higher chance to poison against monsters that have a high threshold, right? That are difficult to poison, this might actually be helpful. This might all be completely not true, right? And it's just different, and it rolls your chance to poison first, right? If you have 60%, it just figures out, did you hit it? If yes, we're gonna try to actually poison the thing. Like if you don't hit it, like I don't know, let's say it's still 50%, and basically you flip a coin, you fail, then it's not even going to attempt to poison it. If you succeed, it will, and then it looks like, okay, how big is your hit? Can you actually poison this thing? Like it's a two-way process. This might also be true, but assume it's the other one, that the threshold of the monster is just a multiplier on your chance. That's like kind of how this works, I guess. Who knows? But yeah, crits do not directly help. They do, however, help you with having a bigger hit initially compared to the ailment threshold. So yeah, crits are useful, but it's not guaranteed. So right, so nope to guaranteeing was never the case anyway. So I created a bit of a simplified case of a monster and a player to hopefully explain, or it's like how I understand them, some of the interactions, and make it a bit more intuitive on how this will work. So we do have a monster here that has like a little bit of chaos resistance. It has, for some cases, a increased damage taken modifier on it, be the curse or whatever that is. And it also has another one, which is also increased damage taken, but it's increased damage over time taken. So like a specific one here, let's say this is 20%, all the numbers don't really matter. You as a player, let's say, you have 10% increased chaos damage. It's like all you have to your base hit. You have a poison magnitude or poison effect, basically what we talked earlier about. So you have 100% of that. It's like a lot. Your poison duration is still 2 seconds, and you can inflict up to 10 poisons. You're probably a pathfinder there, and about Wither we talk a little bit later. We don't even know how Wither works right now, I believe. That's like a thing. So this is like the basic character here. We're also going to assume that this character deals pure chaos damage. We're not going to mix all this with the fist now. Let's say you're just dealing 100 points of chaos damage as like your baseline. And we're also going to assume you have some kind of skill that just like, hits the enemy once, there's like no multi-hitting, whatever. It's just like poke the enemy, and then we're going to see what happens if you poke your enemy with 100% chance to poison. We also assume everything is going to poison all the time. What if you poke it? What happens? And what if you poke it 10 times specifically? What happens then? And you don't do anything else. So you poke the enemy and you deal 100 chaos damage baseline. And say, okay, what we're going to look at here is, okay, this like hit, it does get scaled by the increased chaos damage you have. So I'm going to apply that and all other increased sources, obviously, but in this example, we just scale it with this. Not in these calculations is maybe you even crit, then this number would just be higher, right? But let's ignore this for now. Could just make this number higher, which is useful. That means after these increases to your hit damage, basically you end up with 110 hit damage. This is the number that is used to figure out if you apply a poison or not. Like this is the moment basically in this like entire chain where it's decided if all of this matters or it doesn't. Has nothing to do with this part here, but all of this depends on, do we actually poison? In this case, we're going to assume 100%, but this is the number relevant. Nothing else basically applies to that, at least not in our example here. But we should have pretty much all cases. So after that, and we're still in the hit, right? We don't care about the poison here yet. We know there is a poison that got created, but let's just look at the hit. The next thing that happens here is like, this is like, in this case, it's just chaos resistance, but these are basically the defenses of the monster, right? Does it have any damage mitigation against this specific hit? In this case, it has 10% chaos resistance. And that's it. So we will reduce the damage, but at the same time here is the question, does it have any increases to damage taken? These are multiplicative now in this calculation. I just realized it might actually be additive. Doesn't really matter. Just like, okay, let's just assume it's multiplicative. Probably doesn't really matter. So also the order doesn't matter in this case, but it might be additive. I might be wrong about this. Point is, you apply this increased damage taken, which applies to hits as well, but we do not apply the increased damage over time taken because this is a hit. This doesn't apply, so we just do this one, and then we end up with like 108. 0.9 damage apparently that, you stab at the monster and it loses this amount of life or double amount in energy shield. So that's basically done. That's your hit. The number below here is just times 10 because we say, okay, we want to apply 10 poison, so we have to stab it 10 times, but that's for later. For now, you stabbed it once. It lost some life, basically. For poison, because we did say, okay, it did poison. We have your base poison here. So this one is seems a bit more complicated. The thing that's interesting is, it is this number before damage mitigation and before increased whatever taken, just this basic number here, or crit version of it, that we use for our base poison, which means poison damage per second that we will apply to this monster. So we take this number. We have this 0.3 here. That's the assumption that 30% would be the correct number of the hit. 30% of the hit is converted here. And we also add this poison magnitude. So in this case, it's like we scale this 30% with our, in this case, 100% here. And then we end up with these 110. Chaos ends up with 66 poison damage per second, basically. So from that, we also again see, okay, the monster still has defenses, and that's also an assumption here, right? That defenses of monsters apply to poison damage as well, which I'm pretty sure. The same for damage taken stuff. I believe you cannot directly scale this damage, but all the like damage taken stuff, the resistance and stuff should still apply to this. That's what I'm assuming. If not, it's going to be the most boring thing ever, so I don't believe that. But anyway, you have this base poison thing per second that the monster is suffering, and it has some chaos resistance against that. So the same thing then, okay, this reduces the number. You also have some damage taken modifiers, right? Let's say the monster has increased damage taken, which applies because this seems universal, so it should apply against elements as well. And it has the specific one, which is only for damage over time, which poison probably also is a damage over time. So both of them actually apply. And out of this 66 poison damage per second, you end up with 77.2. So these are basically affecting that. It also means for each stab, right, you stab the monster, you poison it, it will receive this amount of damage per second, but the poison is going to last for 2 seconds. So we multiply it basically with the poison duration. That's what we did here. And the effect out of it is, if you wait, stab it once, wait 2 seconds or the full duration, then just the poison part will have dealt this amount of damage to our enemy. And then the total damage here would be this number here plus this number there, 108 from the hit. Then over the next 2 seconds, if you just don't do anything, it receives that kind of damage as well. This one would bypass energy shield entirely, so it doesn't really matter. So basically, from the actual life of the monster, if it has a lot of energy shield, this will go all into energy shield, and only this is real damage, basically, to life. So kind of separates there a little bit. Then we have this total poison damage, which is like how many poisons can we even inflict. So basically, yeah, you can have up to 10 of them, and then, you stab it 10 times the monster. Let's say this happens instantly, and it's instantly stabbed 10 times. And then you don't do anything for 2 seconds, then the monster will receive this amount of poison damage, and will also have received this amount of chaos hit damage, basically, because, you stabbed it 10 times in this case. That also gives us our poison DPS. It's like a bit over 772 basically of them. And that just means like, okay, if you wait the full thing, the 2 seconds, and this is all the damage that will appear, and you need to wait for 2 seconds, you divide it by the duration. That's the actual DPS you will see. And this can be constant, and just poison DPS, by the way, that you have if you can keep this monster at 10 poison stacks. So in this case, we would need 5 attacks per second, right? Because every poison only lasts 2 seconds. You have the duration, we want to have 10 poisons, so you need like 5 attacks per second. That also means the full DPS would be this one plus 5 times this number here. So yeah, that's like your full DPS, because you need to keep stabbing that monster. It's also interesting because this ratio here is between how much, like for 10 stabs, how much hit damage does it take, how much poison damage does it take at the same time. So the ratio is not that crazy anymore, right? So yes, you can deal a lot of, you can increase, if you invest into it, your poison damage quite a bit, or your damage quite a bit by investing into poison, but it's not as crazy anymore as it was before. It's much more reliant on the actual hit. So I assume you won't see these builds anymore that basically do no hit damage and still a huge amount of poison damage, which is a bit of a fantasy issue I have with that. Like, it feels like, okay, I'm going to build a truck and put tiny poison needles in front of it and then roll people over with it, basically. You still need the truck instead of like the sneaky, you pocket a little bit. It's kind of weird, but that's how it is. So that also means you have like a total damage, which is the total poison damage, and as I just said, the total hit damage for these like 10 pokies that you essentially get there. So that means if you play with the numbers here, you can kind of see what affects what. So if you have like, the monster has resistance, which does not affect this value here, right? It's before, this value is before the resistance or any damage mitigation on the monster is actually applied. So the chaos resistance of the monster doesn't affect this, which in turn, the chaos resistance is not directly affecting this base number here. This only comes later in each of the stages there. So it also means if you lower the resistance of the monster, it has also two different effects, right? So if you give a monster like -22, for example, chaos resistant, then the basic hit is still the same. And the base poison thing is still the same. The actual resulting damage per second, in my opinion, I might be very wrong about this, but I can't believe that this doesn't apply here, is only affected independently. If this is not the case, this is not affected at all, the poison damage, then I don't know, poison is just weird then. But yeah, I assume this is totally fine, so it's still worth it doing that. Same with like increased damage taken is also affected after this hit. Like you can change this to 100%, and only this part here is basically affected by it, which overall increases your poison or your DPS and everything. That's fine, but it doesn't affect this basic this baseline thing here. And for example, if you leave this as normal and you have the increased damage over time taken, right? If you increase that one, that will not affect your actual hit. Not at all. Not the baseline hit and not the effect afterwards, because it's just for damage over time, but it would or should increase the actual damage that the monster receives for the poison that are on that monster, basically. So yeah, that's like how these sides work. The same one, should probably put it up here. We don't know yet how Wither works, but if it's a debuff and if it works similar to before it was like an increased chaos damage taken, I believe. So this would basically make this number here bigger, somewhat additive. I assume, I don't think it's its own multiplier. But yeah, again, it would not affect your hit here. It would not. It would basically affect the hit here, basically, because it's a general chaos damage taken. It's fine. It will not affect your base poison, and it will only have an effect here. Again, if it is scalable by these modifiers, which I really hope it is. Same other things that are affecting it. Your increased chaos damage, right? Like generic stuff of like, okay, increasing chaos damage and everything. This will affect your hit. This is not calculated in here. You cannot scale this number, right? If you increase this one here, right, then it makes your resulting hit bigger, which in turn makes this bigger, but it doesn't double dip again, right? It doesn't like get scaled again by your increased chaos damage and increased attack damage and all of these kind of things. You just make your hit bigger, which is really important. So if you want to scale your poison, you can do that by increasing the initial damage, but it needs to be the hit damage. And it doesn't help with your other increases. So it also means if you find something like increased damage over time, for example, then I would assume this will not be affecting it, right? If you have increased damage over time, right? It sounds like it should work for poison, but it will not, because increased damage over time will not make this number bigger at all. And that's the only thing that matters. It will also not make these bigger, because none of this is over time. Since it doesn't affect this, it will not affect this, and it will not apply anywhere here either. So all these like modifiers there that might sound juicy are probably not, right? It needs to be more or less on the monster side. It cannot be on the player side. However, there's an extra stat for that now, which is quite limiting, I feel like, right? That's this poison magnitude. So your poison magnitude or poison effect, however it's called, this one will not affect any of this, right? It's just poison magnitude. It will also not affect this, or at least it will start here, and it will affect this. Sorry, it will not affect any of this. So you still have this baseline, but it will affect this number here, this right here. You still have like your initial hit. You take 30% of that, and that one gets scaled multiplicative with this one right here. So that's basically your multiplier. Your scaling here really comes into effect, like of the actual damage of it comes into effect with this poison effect here. And then, as I said, I'm not entirely sure, but I hope so, by modifying the monster. But on your side, as soon as you're here, the step, this is basically the last thing you can do to it. After that, you need to modify the monster in some case. So it takes more damage, or lower its resistance or whatever, or lower its defense or anything like that, which both like makes it have more damage. The other thing is the duration of poison. I also really hope I'm right here, but all this stuff here, like this baseline stuff, is calculated as damage per second and then multiplied by the duration. So if you go ahead and double your duration, if you do this right here, what happens is, interesting enough, also the ratio goes up. Like having more duration is really good for the ratio of, okay, for each step, you get way more damage out of it, technically. But like the duration, like the hit is still the same, like nothing changes in here. The damage like of a poison and the DPS of that poison does not change, but what does actually change is the damage per poison, right? If you stab it, then it will deal 4 times this damage if the duration is 4 seconds, but only if you wait for seconds. That's basically it. So if you like stab it and then walk away for seconds, then yeah, that's really, really great. But if you overdo it with your duration, like you have a really long duration and you constantly hitting the monster anyway, like way more often, like your poisons never run out, then you might be in a better spot by investing less into duration and more like these like it's opportunity cost to get that high duration, right? Investing that into something else that increases your hit, for example. So there's always like a balance of how often can you hit, and also depends a lot on how the game actually plays, right? If you constantly in boss fights and it plays out like, okay, you get these like windows and you can hit your, like in our weird example here, you can hit the monster 10 times and then you have to run away for 5 to 6 seconds, then it would be really good to have a poison duration that is 5 to 6 seconds, right? Because in that downtime, you're dealing way, way, way more damage. If the game is more like, okay, I'm hitting the monster, I'm hitting it, let's say just 10 times here every 2 seconds, then the higher duration does basically nothing because it does not increase your DPS. And as soon as the monster dies, all your poisons that you still have on them are basically worthless, right? Because it's dead. So there's some balance in a lot of this basically. Probably less than it was in PoE1. There was like kind of a full-time chaos. It was super, super crazy, and you had like a lot of these PoBs that had like insane poison damage, but like an 8-second duration, right? So you ramp for 8 seconds and nothing lives that long anyway in PoE1, but fair enough. But yeah, that's why duration can be really, really good. It's like a huge multiplier. Really nice. Unless I'm wrong about this DPS thing there. Yeah, means really, really, really good, but a bit of situational. And the other thing is obviously how many poisons can you apply. If you change that to like, you can apply 100 of them basically, then yeah, nothing here changes. Nothing there changes. It's just a total one, right? If you stab it 100 times and then it runs out for 4 seconds, right? You instantly stab it for 100 times and then you wait for a second, then yes, you deal a lot of damage, and that also means yes, your DPS goes up a lot. But that also means you need to apply this amount of poisons within the poison duration, right? If you have like an 8-second poison duration and you want 100 poisons on it, which is fully unrealistic, you would need to spend 8 seconds, or within that 8 seconds, let's assume you need these full 8 seconds to apply 100 poisons. And if you then keep doing that, only then, that's like your ramp basically. You need to apply all of your max poisons until you're at full DPS. There's some ramping in it. So like, I don't know, if you like say, oh my god, I can get another poison, and now I have like I can apply 6 instead of 5, and then a Pathfinder, I'm doubling it, so I get double out of it. So you end up with 12 poisons. Let's do a 4-second duration, 12 poisons instead of 10. If that is good or not depends highly on your attack speed, like how quickly can you apply them. If you have more points, you might also need to invest into the attack speed next to the investment, which typically comes with the downside of applying another poison. And then the question is it then still worth it? do you have in actual fights where it matters? Not only in PoB, if it actually like fights where you needed more damage because it's a difficult encounter, do you have even, based on your attack speed, that is technically quick enough to apply that many poisons in 4 seconds? Do you have enough time in these boss fights, right? Does that work at all? Do you ever get to 12 poisons, or do you often get to 12 poisons? And if that is difficult, then you have to keep in mind additional poison is opportunity cost, additional attack speed is opportunity cost, and then you, I don't know, need to balance that basically against, okay, if I don't take this, right, I take a little bit less attack speed, or I just keep the higher attack speed, but I don't invest into this extra poison that might even reduce my duration, and then I need even more attack speed. Maybe just don't do that and increase your head damage, or invest into something more that has like, gives them the monster more damage taken or stuff like that, or invest into defense so you don't die. You can also maybe, in general, invest into maybe get chill somewhere so the enemy is like slower and your windows of applying poisons is bigger. Or you can invest into defense so you can take more hits so you don't need to dodge that much stuff, which also increases your uptime. Like there's a bunch of stuff in there. But yeah, I believe this is roughly how poison will work. I hope I don't have too big mistakes. Definitely check the comments. I pin stuff in case I find really some people call me out on my nonsense. Feel free to do that, and I hope this was helpful. Okay, bye.